Alright, welcome back to another episode of LionHeart Radio. I'm your host, Rick Alexander, founder of LouAviv Supplement Company based in San Diego, California. I'm here with my co-host, Claudia.
Hi guys, Claudia Challoner, Doctor of Physical Therapy and nationally ranked powerlifter.
And we're also here with Memo.
Memo Ochoa, co-founder of LouAviv.
Alright guys, so today we're going to talk about mental toughness. So we'll talk about a little bit about what spawned this episode, and then kind of what it's actually developed into. So the original thinking was 8 days ago I had a 100-mile foot race, which I did not train for. So I did not train really at all. I ran a couple 10-milers before it.
Yeah.
So essentially I was going to rely completely on mental toughness in order to get through this race.
Mind over muscle.
Yep. And then the thinking was that what we would do is I would do the race, and then I would kind of talk about what was happening mentally throughout the race, and then it would be a good jump off point for the mental toughness episode. What actually happened is I only made it 70 miles until I got pulled from the race. So then I was thinking, man, should we do this episode on failure, or should we keep it on mental toughness? Because I'm dealing with both. And then so anybody that wants to know how that race actually went, at the end of this episode, what we're going to do is we'll scrub in a 25-ish minute clip of me kind of talking, kind of almost mile for mile, what I was going throughout the race, like where I went wrong, but kind of where my head was at for each point. You can kind of what I did is I recorded right when it was over. I recorded a whole breakdown of the whole episode, or the whole race. So anybody that's particularly interested in how it went, just hang out at the end of this episode, and then you can kind of get a feel for what is going through your head when you run 100 miles without training for it, or attempt to. But anyway, so the mental toughness episode, what I've done is I've always considered myself to be somebody that was mentally tough. I have a special forces background in the military. I've competed in a lot of sports throughout my life. Every once in a while I've been drawn to these ultra endurance events. So personally, I've always thought that I was a mentally tough person because I could set my mind to something, and then I could, essentially I felt like nothing could stop me from getting that goal. But as I dug into real mental toughness, I've really started to find that there's a lot more to it than just setting your sights on something and going straight for that. So what I've done is I've come up with 6 pillars of mental toughness, and what I want to do is kind of go through them with you guys. We'll kind of talk to them. I think if you follow all of these pillars, essentially I think that's kind of the makings of a mentally tough person. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, what do you guys think? Why do you think that people should even care about this? So personally, I've completely given up on trying to explain to people why I would do something like run 100 miles. Right? It's something I can't even explain. I wouldn't even expect you to understand. It's like a total contract between me and myself, and I just feel like I have to get through stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I don't know, what do you think? What do you think about the...
Well, I think for an athlete perspective, I think it's really important to have some degree of mental toughness if you want to especially become a higher level athlete. Mm-hmm. I think it is important.
Yeah, I mean, in athletics and everyday life, if you're mentally tough, you're going to succeed. You're going to do better all around.
Yeah, so something I like about athletics is it can help prepare you mentally to deal with setbacks in the rest of your life.
Yeah, and you've also have to look at like you're saying, the military, police, firefighter kind of personnel. All of that's going to play into being. You need to have mental toughness in order to do your duty and do your job. So I think training for that or working on that is definitely a piece you need to look at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like in episode 2, Chappie Hunter, he talks about the fact that if it wasn't for his strength and CrossFit background, he wouldn't have dealt with something as traumatic as losing his leg as well as he did. Yeah. And a lot of that has to be that mental toughness component. Mm-hmm. I remember 2 years ago watching the CrossFit Open at my gym, and it was a workout that was I think it was 95-pound thrusters and burpees over the bar, and it was like 21, 18, 15, 12, 9, 6, 3.
Yeah.
Terrible workout.
Yeah.
And I remember watching people, it was their first open. It's probably debatable whether they should be doing this for sure. But one thing that's undeniable, I remember watching a girl struggle through it, and it probably took her 40 minutes, like, and it was just brutal for some people.
Yeah.
But as I'm like watching her, all I'm thinking is like, this is an experience that people tend not to get in their life, right? Like this is something that's really fucking hard to push through, and I think that that has to translate to your regular life and in a ton of different ways.
Oh yeah, well I mean I definitely think it translates into just even coming into different traumas or tough experiences that you might go through in your life. Like I don't know, a parent passing away, or you losing a job, or spouse leaves you, anything like that. If you have mental toughness, I think it's going to allow you to cope better with those types of situations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, okay. So personally, before we get into the pillars, like we were saying, so fitness can really help prepare someone mentally for the rigors of life, no matter what that is. If you have a job like the Army or I mean the military, or law enforcement or firefighter, being fit has a direct translation because it's required in your job. But I'm a fan of programming difficult workouts in your programming that are almost unrealistically difficult, only because they make you forge that mental toughness. And that's not to say, I know there's a lot to say for like linear progressions and only doing what you can do when it comes to programming different workouts. But like the hero wads in CrossFit, how they do Murph every Memorial Day.
Yeah.
So Murph is 1 mile run, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 squats, mile run, and prescribed is with a weight vest, not partitioned, so straight through.
Yeah.
Like that will develop some mental toughness, especially if you're an accountant.
Yes.
Right? You do not see shit like Murph in your everyday life. So that's something I think that is absolutely worth looking into for people, or even thinking about as they develop workouts. If you're a trainer, think about what you're training people for. A lot of people are just working out to be really good at life, to be really fit for life. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that happens inevitably in life is that you're going to get curveballs thrown at you.
Yeah.
So the more you can prepare for that, it's kind of the whole train like you fight, you'll fight like you train. So being able to program workouts that are designed specifically to tax you mentally, I think is a good idea, especially if it's movements like body weight movements where there's not a huge neurological demand.
Yeah, exactly.
Like programming 200 snatches for time. Yeah, that's mentally tough, but it's
also physiological. You might get some breakdown of actual physiological changes.
Right. So figuring out workouts that are like body weight, things like that, I think could be hugely beneficial, and that's probably a aspect of programming that I think a lot of people miss the mark on.
Yeah.
I think every good coach, they definitely they can explain to their athlete why it is that they're doing a certain workout. That way the athlete can be prepared for it when they go in to do it. Like, hey, are we working on technique? Are we working on speed? Like what's the goal of the workout? Mm-hmm. And just my 2 cents, but I think programming workouts specifically to develop mental toughness.
It also helps people reach their own limits or find their limits, because a lot of people might be doing CrossFit or maybe run a marathon or something like that, and they have never felt that limit in their life. And so how are they gonna go about that limit? Are they gonna keep pushing? Mm-hmm. Are they gonna quit? Like, what are they gonna do with that? So I think that's important to experience as a human.
Yeah. I'm an instructor in the military right now, just for a little background. But one of the things I always tell my students is when we're training, because right now I'm in a phase where we kind of help people remediate and get ready to go back into training. I tell them while we're training and we have these workouts, put the gas to the floor. Like, go all out. Don't partition it. Don't pace yourself. Red line right out of the gate. Go as hard as you can, as fast as you can. Mm-hmm. Because what's going to happen is just go until the wheels come off, which sounds crazy, but these aren't movements where, these are running and stuff. You're not looking at joint damage or whatever. Yeah. I'm like, go as hard as you can. That way when the wheels come off, you know exactly what that feels like.
Yeah.
Right? And then start getting yourself ready, because if you're the person that gets their back against the wall and their first reaction is to quit, like that's some shit you got to know about yourself.
Yeah.
You know, that's like a specific application for the military, but it's like, in as much as you can, you know, you need to be that person that like wipes their face off and keeps moving forward. Mm-hmm. So, I'm a huge fan of stuff like that.
Yeah. Experiencing your limits.
Yeah, huge fan. It's funny because when I'm in the middle of it, I'm not a big fan.
I say the same thing.
Yeah, I'm like, for 4 months I talked about like, man, I'm gonna run this 100 miles. I'm like excited about not training for it. I want to feel the pain. I'm gonna crush it. And when I'm in it, I'm like, what is wrong with me? This hurts so bad.
I'm doing this again.
Yeah.
Then 2 days later, all right, I'm gonna sign up again.
I know. And then 2 days later, I'm signed up again. Damn it. All right, so the 6 pillars of mental toughness. So the first one, I think that people that are mentally tough, they don't spend time feeling sorry for themselves. So what I mean by that is, we all have shortcomings. We all have things that are going to go wrong. There's a lot of things that we can't control. If you're mentally tough, your best bet in life is to acknowledge what that problem is or that misfortune is, learn from it, and then move on. Mm-hmm. Right? So I think, personally, I think that's, and I guess some of these could be like, I don't know, these are kind of like pillars for successful people or whatever. But either way, I think feeling sorry for yourself it's a complete like negative feedback loop, and you're gonna wind up in a rough place.
Yeah, one of the like building exercises for developing more mental toughness is training yourself to increase your confidence. I think that's a huge way to increase your mental toughness is improving your confidence, and not having that low self-esteem, kind of tying into what you were talking about. So kind of a exercise that you could do for it is working on overcoming like smaller failures, you know, whether it's a new hobby that you take on or maybe a smaller race or something that might be a stepping stone to something a little bit greater, that you can conquer these smaller failures, learn from them, and then you're ready for something that you're going to fail in eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah, and overcome that.
Yeah, so to go a step further, that's kind of like what we were talking about, is by programming these adverse situations into your workouts or your life, like that'll develop the confidence because you know, well, I've gotten through a situation like this before. Essentially, is like, is that what we're kind of?
Yeah, and I was listening to a lot of sports psychologists and stuff that go through different training for kids in sports, and they actually have done a lot of studies on it, and they want kids to go through like small failures so they can create almost like that super athlete, because you have to be able to. Now, is every athlete gonna conquer that or be okay with that smaller failure? No, definitely not. But that's where those super athletes are gonna come out from that, is they're gonna cope with whatever you give to them, and they're gonna figure out and learn from it, and then they're gonna go on.
One of the things that we see a lot in training is that we have these students come through that are Ivy League education, Division I athletes. You know, they've played football all their life. They've crushed everything they've ever done. And when they get here and there's something here that's going to be extremely hard for you, right? You could be a good swimmer. Maybe the running will get you. If you're a good runner, the swimming. I mean, there's obstacle courses. There's all these things that are designed to test you in all these different ways in the military. And a lot of times those people will get there expecting to crush it, just like they have everything else that's come their way in life. And they meet adversity, and then duffel bag drag out of the gate, and they gone. So that's kind of something to think about. It's definitely worth programming these confidence boosters.
Yeah, I was listening to something else the other day that was talking about, they stated talent needs trauma, talking about athletes in particular, and talking about it's not necessarily the traumatic event in life, and that could be maybe growing up with divorced parents, or whatever it might be, or your father leaves or something, but it's not that actual event that makes you a higher level athlete or a successful person. It's what you do through that experience and how you cope with that. This is pretty interesting to look at, because a lot of people, they come from a rough background, that's all they're guaranteed to do something or whatever it might be. But yeah.
I remember, so the first time I started doing strongman about 5 years ago, and before my first strongman, the opening deadlift was 500 pounds, and I had never deadlifted 500, and I was scared shitless that I was going to get up there and just pull on this thing like it was that damn sword stuck in the rock, and I was just never going to move it, and I was going to look like such an asshole in front of all my family and friends, because it was in my hometown. And I couldn't deadlift 500 pounds. That was not my deadlift. My deadlift was like 475, and I had like 5 months ish, which is enough time.
Yeah.
But what I did is I knew I could pull 470. You know when you get that PR, it's like you can pull 475 all day long, and 477 will never move. It's like you know that.
Oh yeah, exactly. It's all in your head.
Yeah. But what I did is I pulled 475 like every other day. I would walk up to the bar, and I'd like do it speed pulls as fast as I could. I knew for sure I would always pull it. And I never pulled something I couldn't pull. And then when I got up to that 500, it was I don't know if it was muscle memory, but it was just ingrained in me. It was like confidence. I just walked up and I pulled it like it was 475. Yeah. And I had time to prepare for that and do it. But I think those reps continuously for months, it was like, it just built that into me. So yeah. All right. So the second pillar, don't give away your power. So what I mean by that is wasting time on things that you can't control. So right now we're in the middle of this political season, this god-awful political season. So I was telling you, like, I would consider myself to be mentally tough, and I look at my Facebook and I get all bent out of shape about all of these political things, right? And there is nothing that I'm ever going to do to control that situation. So that's something to think about. I think somebody that's truly mentally tough, they don't give away their power like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just discipline. Keeping all the negative out.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's like discipline, and I think it's also, it's like wisdom to just know, like, to like be, or I guess discipline's a good word for it, to focus on what you can control. Yeah. And not worrying so much about what you can't control.
That ties into just the ability to cope with change, too. Mm-hmm. Because...
Ooh, we're getting into pillar 3.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll hold off then.
No,
Go
keep
ahead
going,
and
keep going.
state your pillar then.
Keep going.
Because if, I don't know, let's say I go out to my car after this and my tire is flat and I can't get a hold of anyone, you know, my ability to cope with that and just be okay with that and figure out another situation, or like freaking break down and be so upset and let it really get to me, like not that that would happen with a flat tire, but it could. Right. That's kind of that ability to cope with change and be okay with change, and what can you do with that change.
Right.
Yeah.
Pillar 3. You have to be willing to accept or embrace change.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to accept the risk that comes along with change. Mm-hmm. I think so often successful people in life, they're solution-oriented people. Mm-hmm. You know, and no matter what, like, there's always a million reasons why something's not going to work out, why you can't do something. The people that, like, really crush it, I think they're the people that focus on what they can do, the solution, figuring out how that can go right, that kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. So one of the, I think, tried and true ways to make yourself better at embracing change is to compete in your sport or to compete in something. The reason I say that is because everybody knows, let's say it's Olympic, or let's say it's weightlifting. Like, on a perfect day, you know what your PRs are. And competition is never a perfect day. Yes. I would say. So you can compete 100 times, and you might be lucky to get one of those days where the bar feels light. You know what I mean? I don't know if you guys have experienced that. But it's like we were talking about with this run. Like, I was planning on running 100 miles. I wasn't planning on fighting the single track trail all night and trying to figure out where I was at. You know, slipping like constantly off the ledge. I wasn't planning on the hill to be soft sand. Like, these are all things I hit, and once you're in it, like, you know, you're either the kind of person that, like, folds that problem inward and feels sorry for yourself, or, you know, uses it as an obstacle.
You embrace it and adapt and continue.
Yeah. And I mean, we talk about episode 2 with Chappie Hunter. He probably would have been good to have on for mental toughness, because this is a person that lost his leg and 8 days later was in the gym. Yeah. 21 days later is doing CrossFit workouts. You know?
Crazy.
That's somebody that looked at a huge change and just ran with it. Focused on the solution and kept moving forward.
And then all the work that he's been doing with the adaptive athletes and stuff. I mean, he has taken this huge change in his life. I mean, losing a leg, and then taking it to something so positive of helping other people that are going through the same stuff as him. Yeah. It's awesome.
I think that's a strong human.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I try to think, like, if I'm in that situation, like, 8 days you were in the gym? Like, am I going to feel bad for myself maybe for 9 days? Like, I don't know. That's a strong person right there.
Yeah.
Okay, number 4. I think mentally strong people don't resent other people's success. So, I mean, I've seen this a lot. You see it a lot, like, in the working environment especially. I don't think it, at least in my experience in the gym, there's not really a lot of that. Like, people are generally happy for other people's PRs or, you know, records or whatever. Like, that's something, at least I know, that drew me to CrossFit is, like, when you finish a workout and you're done, you're not, like, out of there, right? Like, you stay and you, like, work, you cheer on the people. Even in the highest level of the games, people will finish a workout and it's like, everybody knows how tough that is. And so they turn around and they, like, cheer on or coach or whatever they can do to help the next person kind of get through it. But in the work environment, you definitely do see a lot more of this. I mean, I've been guilty of it. Like, you have to, like, in my opinion, you have to guard yourself against some of these, like, pitfalls that, like, you get in this, like, negative feedback loop, and that's, like, when you become mentally weak. And so one of the ways that I think people can, like, help themselves not start resenting other people's success is by knowing what their success is. So I think if you write down your own goals and your own version of success, you're not going to waste time worrying about others. You know, I think writing down your goals is something everybody should do. You know, but when you know exactly what you're going toward, I think you're less likely to get derailed by other people's success. You know.
Well, you're too worried about yourself, and it goes back to pillar number 2. Not getting distracted by other things. Is that what pillar 2 was? Yeah,
don't give away your power. A lot of pillars. And then I think that kind of comes from feeling like the world kind of owes you something. I think every generation gets down on the generation that's coming up after them, right? So I don't want to, like, do that here. But you can't feel like the world owes you something and be successful in life. Because the reality is it doesn't, and the universe in general tends not to care about your feelings, right? So, like, if you're a mentally weak person, if you're somebody that kind of has that entitlement mentality, it's going to be really hard for you to go out and, like, take things and be successful and push on. My 2 cents, I think. All right, so some of these, obviously, they tie into other ones, but pillar number 5 was, like, don't let failure be a roadblock. So everybody is going to fail. Like we said, there's always a million reasons why you can't do something or why something won't work out. And then Murphy will always find that one thing and highlight it for you, just so you can be aware. I mean, I talk about, at the end of my synopsis on the race, I talk about, like, if I'm being completely honest, I feel like I don't fail things very often. I can't think of when I set out to do this run, I couldn't think of, it wasn't even a thought in my head that I would fail. It was like, I'm gonna do this no matter how much it hurts. So when I did, and I didn't fail because I quit, I failed because I got pulled. And it was like, so at that point, there's nothing I can do. It's, like, out of my power at this point. Like, failure. Deemed. Done. And I'm like, it was humbling. And then I thought about it for a minute, especially once I was out of the race and I showered and stuff, and I'm, like, starting to, like, kind of feel better and come out of the whole situation, and I'm getting more and more angry, like, I cannot explain to people that I fucking failed this thing. And I'm getting wicked mad about it. But, you know, I had to give myself that moment, and that's kind of that acknowledge your problem, fix it, and move on, you know? And so, you know, my thing is, I'm like, okay, well, now I know this was something that I don't want to be a roadblock for me. It's going to be an obstacle. I'm going to train for the next 100-miler that I run. But that's just how I looked at it. It's like, you know, it can't be a roadblock.
Yeah.
And then the last pillar that I have is know your why. So know your reason for doing whatever you're doing. I think once I just actually wrote a Culture Report article about this, but once you start knowing why it is you're doing something, all of your actions, all of your decisions, everything you do will fall in line with what that reason is, as opposed to not knowing. And this kind of also goes back to like writing your goals down and like figuring it out. But like really knowing your why is like an exhausting purpose. It's like exhaustive to try to figure that out.
I think that's an ongoing process too.
It is.
You're going to generally find your why, but I think that's going to always evolve throughout your life and change.
And so Chappie, he talks about like his wife and his kid.
Yeah.
That's like a super powerful why.
Yeah.
And so when that's your why, you'll always come out on top, I think, because wife and your kid is a pretty powerful motivator.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly.
And Simon Sinek, I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He gives a good TED Talk. I can't remember the name of it. I think it's, I don't know. Maybe edit this part out. But essentially what Simon talks about is like organizations and business should think the military has a very strong why. Like we've been really good at programming a really like nationalistic pride within the U.S. population. And because of that, we have an all volunteer military that's highly successful. The only reason that that's possible is because everybody's why is so strong. Like most people believe that the country, the reason they're fighting is worth dying for, and when your why is so powerful that you're willing to die for it, everything else, there's a lot of obstacles that can be overcome.
Yeah.
So I think that for anybody though, like just at least that self-exploration of trying to figure out why you're doing something, like why you want to be fit, like whatever that is, why you're doing even your certain activity, it's easy for you to make decisions. It's easy for you to that are in the best interest of your reason. It's definitely something that I think is an ideal that everyone should push toward knowing. Yeah. So to recap the 6 pillars of mental toughness, and this is just like a good way for someone to think about kind of like a self-test on like how, like me personally, I've always considered myself to be mentally tough, like I said, but if you go back and you look at like all of the different angles of mental toughness, it's like I really just have like a couple that I'm really strong with, and I like really need to work at some of them. So the first one was don't spend time feeling sorry for yourself. Don't give away your power. Embrace change. Be willing to accept the risk. It's part of that, embrace change. Number 4 was don't resent other people's success, aka focus on your own shit. Number 5, don't let failure be a roadblock. And then number 6 was kind of know your why. So those are the 6 pillars. And then there's certain activities that they kind of draw out mental toughness more than others. Like we were talking about the hero wads in CrossFit.
Yeah, or running 100 miles.
Or running 100 miles. Yeah. That started straining on my mental toughness at mile 13. And then another one of those is like the combat sports. I think probably nothing exemplifies it, mental toughness, more than the combat sports. Like MMA, boxing, kickboxing. And I think because you're one-on-one, there's nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
I boxed in high school, and that's something I remember because I also played lacrosse at the same time. When you're tired in lacrosse, there's 10 other people on the field. You can kind of sandbag it a little bit. If you sandbag when you're boxing, you're getting punched straight in your face.
Might end up on the mat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also competed in amateur boxing for about 4 or 5 years. And so that's why I always found it fascinating to like talk about the mental toughness of combat sports. Because it takes like another level. And it was so interesting because I'm from West Virginia, so I grew up in a podunk town, and our boxing gym was just like, it started off in the like back of a beauty shop. And so it was pretty much like the ring, and that was it. And so
you were like backyard fighting.
Oh, dude, yeah. It was crazy.
You were like Kimbo Slice. R.I.P.
I definitely competed in the rough and rowdy brawl at one point. And it was very interesting because it is mostly kids, and it drew in so many different types of kids. I mean, there was kids that were coming in there, maybe they had they were picked on at school. We had this one guy that, like, oh my gosh, I swear, like, he would not give up for anything. He would fight any guy in the gym. He was like a beanpole, like so skinny, but he was just so mentally tough. And I think he came in there to like let out aggression or whatever because he was picked on at school. But then you also had someone like me that was in there, which I did pageants, you know, and I was like, I just wanted
Damn, really?
something to yeah.
She's hanging out at the beauty salon. She saw a ring in the back.
Right?
Like, what's this?
Man, you are an interesting person.
So it was pretty fascinating to see just the different varieties of people that came in there, but all equally had that mental toughness to get in the ring and battle it out and stay strong, because it's not fun getting hit in the face.
Right.
But, you know, you just have to stay tough with it, I guess.
Yeah.
You know?
By and large, I think the world is forgiving of people that are cocky in combat sports for a very specific reason. So if you're like, I'm going to crush that guy, you just seem like an asshole if you're playing baseball or basketball.
Yeah.
And you're talking shit to the other team, right?
Yeah.
But, like, there's no other mindset you can have in combat sports, in my opinion, because, like, well, boxing is the only one that I have experience with. But if your opinion is, I don't know, we'll see how it goes, you're going to take a lot of abuse to the face. So the world, by and large, is, like, forgiving of people like Conor McGregor who come out really strong, like, really cocky sounding. But it's like, there's no other way, in my opinion, to get in the ring.
Yeah, exactly. You got to have confidence in yourself.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, then you're not going to last.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because you have to find that line of confidence and cocky.
Yes.
You know? Like,
yeah.
You know your skill set, and you also know the work it takes to stay there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I think we see that a lot too, especially in combat sports. Is like people get to the top, and they get so used to a certain, you know, to winning essentially.
Yeah.
And then,
definitely.
You know, they get too comfortable.
Yeah.
Get tested.
Yeah.
Get knocked out. You know.
Yeah.
All right, so that's kind of our take on mental toughness. And again, so for those that are interested in really like kind of how the race went and where things went wrong, right after this, we'll cut in about 25 unedited minutes of me right after I finish the race.
Pure raw.
Pure raw. I just hooked a mic up and just talked about how it went, and you can kind of get an idea of what was going through my head at each point. So, all right, cool. Thanks for listening in.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about the ultra marathon that I just tried to complete, the Santa Barbara 100. Essentially, that was a 100-mile foot race through the San Ynez mountain range, about 27,000 feet of elevation gain and loss. I originally told the LionHeart podcast crew that I would record every 30 miles, so I was going to do like 30, 60, and 90, and then maybe again at the end. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why that didn't happen. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the race went, what was kind of going through my mind, and then I'll try to keep it short. So race started at 6 o'clock on Friday night, and I felt really good going into the race mentally. As we talked about before, I really didn't train that much for this race. I never actually ran one time over 17 miles was the longest I ran in one setting in the last probably 6 months. But I wasn't really doing this race in order to win or to be a really good, because I'm a good runner. I do it because I like to test myself. And I kind of just wanted to know kind of where those limits were, which I definitely found on this race. So the race started at 6 o'clock at night. I felt pretty good going into it. And throughout the first night, so the first 10 miles, I had a crew there. My girlfriend and my other buddy Brendan were crewing for me. So the first checkpoint that I was able to see them at was the 10-mile checkpoint. So through the first 10 miles, it was a lot of just kind of jockeying for position. You kind of get that long conga line because it was a lot of single track. Trying to figure out my rhythm. I would say after 5 miles, so the first 5 miles seemed really long, like really further than 5 miles. But it was more like it was adjusting to all of the hills. And in the second 5 miles, going into the 10-mile checkpoint, I felt really good. in my rhythm. I felt like I was getting into a good place, and I probably came out a little bit too fast there. I ran the first, I guess, just under 11 miles in 2 hours, which when you're trying to run 100 and you're not trained for it, that probably is a little bit too hard. But nevertheless, I felt good. I came into the checkpoint. I ate a little bit. I had like half a cookie, and I was really having trouble. I stuffed some food in my pockets. I was having trouble eating anything. Just like when you run 10 miles hard, it's hard to eat. So then I left that checkpoint, and then I wasn't going to see my crew again until the following morning at the mile 42 checkpoint. So I left, and so when I left, I had taken a little bit of a wrong turn. So you had to follow these flags that sometimes were hard to see during the day. At night, they were easier because you were just looking for reflection. But during the day, they were a little bit harder. So I got off track. I ran about an extra mile about a half mile before figuring that out. So maybe an extra mile total. Not that big of a deal. I mean, I'm running for the next essentially 36 hours was the plan. So yeah, I wasn't too bummed about an extra mile. It was whatever. And then I got 3 miles into that leg, and I had my first like complete lockup. I was climbing a hill that was about 2 miles worth of climbing, and my legs just completely, I started feeling it coming on. I ate a few Tums, which will help kind of get rid of that lockup. And but I ate them too late, and I just locked up completely. Both legs, couldn't move for a minute. I let out a little bit of an audible fuck, and then somebody was running by, and they're like, "Hey, you all right?" And I was like, "Yeah, I just locked up a little bit." And they gave me 2 salt tabs, which I ate right there, drank some water, and it was my savior. Within, a minute or two, I was like running again after eating the salt tab. So that kind of opened my eyes to like, okay, salt's going to be not just electrolytes, but sodium in particular is going to be key to this race. And then the next few checkpoints were pretty uneventful, but from miles 22 to 30 was absolutely terrible. It was almost all up. The last 7 miles was all uphill. It was single track. It was along a ridge line, so there was a lot of places, and it's pitch dark at this point, so there's a lot of places that you can fall. One guy actually fell. He fell like 25 feet and got a concussion and had to get, I think, medevaced out of there or something. I saw at least 10 people, like, you're constantly tripping. I saw at least 10 people, fall down and, at least get some skin ripped open. There were baby heads everywhere, the tiny little rocks, and it was really hard to see. And about an hour into the night, my flashlight died, so I only had my headlamp. So I had to continuously look down at the trail, which was kind of overgrown in some spots, and then look up for the actual trail markers. Luckily, I had people with me for a good part of the night, but I definitely spent, probably like 5 hours of the night just running by myself, trekking up these, mountain ranges or whatever. And then, so from mile 22 to 30, absolutely fucking terrible. It was all uphill. It was desolate. I was by myself. It was a lot of soft sand uphill. I don't even know how they get beach sand on this fucking mountain range. But I'm slipping a lot. I'm getting a lot of rocks in my shoes and that kind of thing. And I made a mental note to myself, hey, when I get to mile 30, I know I have a drop bag there, so I'm going to change my socks. And I'll probably keep the same shoes, at least for a little bit while longer. But I just climbed, and then eventually I just popped out to what I thought would have been a little clearing, but it was the checkpoint, which couldn't have come. I mean, it was amazing to see that. So I walked over to the checkpoint, and I ate, and at that checkpoint, someone handed me a Mountain Dew, and I drank it, and I realized that that was going to be my savior. I couldn't get a lot of stuff down. I was drinking a lot of water, a lot of electrolytes. I kept dipping watermelons in salt. That was like a really easy thing I could keep down, and the salt was keeping my legs from locking up again. Every time I would start to feel it coming back, I would eat Tums, and then I would eat the watermelon dipped in salt, and it pretty much kept my legs from locking up for a long time. And I think if the race would have been pretty flat, I honestly probably wouldn't have had that much of a problem, but I spent the whole night climbing and on single track, and that single track that you're tripping constantly at night, you're running through thorns. It just beats you up pretty good, a lot more than 30 miles would beat me up. I think I've run a lot of marathons, and at the end of a marathon, I'm always feel like I can do more. But I got to the end of this 30 miles, and I had climbed a lot, and I was pretty rocked, and I was so out of energy, I think just from competing with the trail and the night and trying to figure everything out, that I thought about the podcast, and I was like, there's no fucking way I'm pulling my phone out right now to make this podcast. It's just not going to happen. So I was like, oh, I'll get it later. And then the next 6 miles were mostly downhill, probably like 3/4 of it were downhill, down into the forest, kind of through the woods, and more single track into the mile 36 checkpoint. And at this checkpoint, the sun was 4 o'clock in the morning, 4:30 in the morning. So I was ahead of my schedule, ahead of my planned schedule. So I ate there. I'm trying to remember what I ate. I think I had some chicken soup. Soup was always good. Anything liquid or anything dry was just impossible to get down. I tried to have a quesadilla later in the day, and I couldn't even get it down. But, so I was at mile 36. Felt good. I spent some time there. I dumped my shoes out, all the sand out of my shoes, which was something I forgot to do at mile 30, which that was mistake number 1. And when you get halfway through the trail, something that I'll do for the next one is, you can always sit down and take the time to fix the little things in an ultramarathon, because the little things are going to end up very big problems if you don't, which this definitely did. But I was like, oh, well, it doesn't, I'll just clear them at the next one. And I should have just stopped right there. So I get to 36, clean my shoes. A couple people look at me and they're like, man, how much do you weigh? At the time I weighed 229. Right now that I just finished the race and I weigh 218. But so they were like they're kind of like taken aback that I was doing it, which is not that uncommon. I think most of the people there were probably 180-ish pounds, would be like a heavy guy for an ultramarathon. A lot of them are like 150s. I don't know, just looking, that's what it looked like. But for whatever reason, them saying that to me kind of got me pumped up. I felt good, so I left the mile 36, and then I had to climb all the way up to mile 42. Well, the sun was coming up, and it was kind of behind the clouds, so it was a brisk, like, nice, cool breeze as I was so I'm not sure what just happened there. Someone called my phone, so I'm going to keep going here. But anyway, so I was climbing up to mile 42, and it was nice and foggy, and it just... I felt really good. The weather was cool. It looked like it wasn't going to be that hot of a day. And the climbs had been killing me all night, but for whatever reason, this time I felt good. And I passed like probably 8 people on that climb. So that was my next mistake, which I didn't realize at the time. But when you do an event that is an ultra distance or a long endurance event, you have to learn to manage the highs and the lows. And that was something that I didn't do, so I felt really good. So when I was low, I would move really slow, and when I was high, I would move really fast. Well, so when I felt really good, I cruised up this climb, and I think a lot of people just were at a low at that point when I happened to start feeling really good. And so I really charged that hill, and looking back, that's like when the wheels really started to come off. So I get to mile 42 checkpoint, and my crew is there. So I haven't seen them all night, so that felt good. About 11 hours in at this point, which granted is slow, but given the terrain and stuff of this race, it's pretty expected. So I get there, and right away I sit down, and everybody's trying to ask me how I'm doing. The crew is asking me how I'm doing, and I've never really felt anything like this, but I realized at that moment I couldn't answer them because I couldn't acknowledge like how I was feeling, because if I did, it was going to all come to the forefront and I was just going to break the fuck down. So I just would say okay. I just kept saying okay, and I would like turn away. I literally couldn't look at them. I couldn't acknowledge the pain. It was kind of a terrible place to be in mentally, but it was like, this is where I'm at. I just have to ignore everything that's going on and just push forward, get through this thing. So I spent not too much time at mile 42, and I had made up more time. So I had the time, and I should have spent a little more time at the checkpoint, but I was like, oh, let's just keep moving. And one of the things that the race director had said was that if you're going to get to mile 42, and you don't think you're going to make it, you should quit there, because you're going to go 8 miles to the 50-mile turnaround, and then you're going to come 8 miles back. Well, that 8 miles is desolate. It's like a furnace because it winds in this canyon, and the sun is like, it's like midday at that point, so it was super hot. I don't know what the temperature was, but I think it was close to 100. And when you really got in the canyon, and then at the same point, like, they can't really get a lot of emergency or anything vehicles in there. So there's a crew at mile 50, but you know, if you walk in, you got to walk out, or you got to spend a lot of money to get rescued, which I would never get rescued. So I was like, anyway, I didn't think much of it at the time, but I did think of it later on. So I leave the mile 42 checkpoint. I get about 4 miles in, and all hell just starts breaking loose in my body. My legs were locking up, so I was drinking salt water, and I think that might have been the downfall, is I was drinking so much salt to keep my legs from locking up that I just had explosive diarrhea. I started vomiting, I was shaking a little bit, and I honestly couldn't move more than probably 40 feet without vomiting or having to go to the bathroom. So, and there's no bathroom, so it's on the side of the road. And I only had baby wipes, so every time I would even wipe, like, the burning was so fucking painful. It was definitely like one of the most low points in my whole entire life. It's actually good that there was nowhere to quit, because I was over it at that point. And I had lost, and by the time I remember I talked to a guy and I said, how far am I from the checkpoint? He was like, oh, you're about 1.5 miles. Well, his GPS was wrong, and I was actually still 3 miles from the checkpoint. So the next hour, maybe longer, of me moving those 3 miles was, I mean, I would say it was hands down probably one of the worst of my entire life. So I get to mile 50 checkpoint, and I'm like, I'm not going anywhere. I'm sitting down. Like, I have to figure something out here. So I'm just drinking soda. Like, I had like 2 Cokes, 2 Sprites. They made me a quesadilla, which I got a little bit of it down. I had a ton of watermelon. And I just sat there and ate and talked to him for a while, and a little bit of life came back in my body. And I was like, okay, I can, mentally I was able to get myself pulled back together. And then, the vomiting and diarrhea had stopped. So leaving mile 50, I spent a little extra time there. But I knew that if I didn't, the race was going to be over for sure. So I was like, well, I might as well spend the time, get feeling better, and then try to make up the time, because after mile 50, since you had done so much uphill to that point, I knew it was going to be a lot of downhill from then on out. What I didn't count on is when you go uphill, it's a lot of posterior chain. So your calves, your hamstrings, and your glutes are being utilized. Well, when you come downhill, essentially, you're smashing your toes in the front of your shoes, and your quads are just taking all that shock. But they're all, already kind of fried from stepping up on big things or whatever. Well, something I didn't really think about, didn't really matter too much, but not being trained for the event, that definitely kind of screwed me looking back. So I left mile 50, and I felt good, and I actually brought a couple sodas with me, because I had started realizing, like, hey, every time I have a soda, it's like, it's that quick sugar rush. Is like those carbs are just giving me instant energy, and they're carrying me, like, I would say I got like a couple miles out of every soda I had. So I brought some with me. And from mile 50 to 57, which was the original, 42.8 checkpoint or whatever, I felt really good, and I made up a good chunk of the time I had lost in that last little breakdown. So I was running the straights and the downhills and hiking pretty hard on the uphills, to the point where everyone that I left the checkpoint with, I had dropped, and I was even starting to catch some of the people that were ahead of me. So that felt pretty good. I got to mile 50 and 57, and the race director was there, and I remember him asking me, like, hey, how you doing? I just looked at him like, hey, I'm fucking alive, man. I didn't know what to say. I was like, kind of like starting to like really having to not be able to acknowledge pain at that point. And I could see in his eyes he kind of wanted to pull me, because that last leg had taken me so long. But I was like, well, I didn't really give him a choice. I was like, I'm good, man. I'm going to go forward. And at that, there was a lot of people taking really good care of me at that checkpoint, which was one thing I'll say about the Santa Barbara 100. It is a brutally awful race. But everybody's in it together, and some of the people, a lot of people would quit at the mile 42 checkpoint like they said to. And a lot of those people who had dropped out, their pacers and their crew stayed back to help the other racers, which was really awesome, something, that you don't see in a lot of sports. So that was pretty great. Anyway, I got to 57, iced everything. I had Julie, my girlfriend, she changed my shoes. So she took my socks off. We baby powdered all my feet, my socks, my shoes. And then I put on new shoes, which they weren't even running shoes. It was like kind of like bare bones what I had in one of my drop bags. But I throw those on and I'm like, okay, I can't spend a lot of time here. I drank a Red Bull. Didn't help me like soda did, which kind of sucked. I thought it would. And I was like, I can't spend a lot of time here because I still got to make up time because there's a hard cutoff for mile 70 for the checkpoint. So I leave for mile 57 and my pacer came with me. He was going to come with me. It was down to the mile 63 checkpoint, 63.8, and then up to mile 70. And then, so climbing up to mile 70 was the same climb, but it was the backside that I had done up to 30. So I knew I had to make up time by that climb because I knew how awful that was the night before. And I was fresh the night before, so I really had to get going. Well, I got about to mile 60, so I would say 2-3 miles into that leg, and at that point, my body just really started falling apart. I knew I was screwed because I stood up in my brand new socks and shoes, and I still felt like my shoes had rocks all through them. So at that point, I knew it wasn't actually the rocks; it was my feet that were just completely just Hamburg at that point. Skin was missing on my toes, my heels. But the worst part was just all the bruising to the bottom of my feet from the rocks. I didn't use shoes that were really good for running. They were good, like decent trail shoes if you're running on a dirt trail, but because there were so many rocks, it just really beat the hell out of the bottom of my feet, and they were really bruised up. So, a few miles into that leg, my hip flexors really weren't working. My heart rate would be 180. I would be maximum effort, and I would be moving like maybe a little bit faster than a walking pace. I was getting really frustrated, but just trying to keep moving forward. Hopefully this is just one of those things. I'll get to the next checkpoint, I'll drink a lot of soda, I'll come out of it again, and hopefully I'll just make up the time. At this point, there's nothing else I can do. I'm 60 miles into this thing. I'm not quitting. I just want to keep moving forward and do my best. So I get to the mile 63.8 checkpoint, and they were out of almost everything. It really sucked. They had almost no food. I think I had an old piece of watermelon, and they found one soda that they had left, so I drank that Coke, and I couldn't even spend time there because I'd lost so much time. And I was like, okay, we got to keep going. And so I thought that the worst would be behind me, not knowing that the climb up to mile 70 was really going to test, pretty much everything I had. So the guys at mile 63 or 64, whatever it was, they were like, do you think you're going to make it by the absolute cutoff? And I'm looking at him like, you and I both know I'm not making it to that checkpoint. But I also know that if I say no, you're going to not let me leave, and they're going to, make me ride out of there as the checkpoint packs up. So I was like, yeah, that's the plan. It didn't even give him time to respond, and I just start shuffling away. And it's all uphill. It's two hills that seem like you might be getting to the top, and then the really demoralizing part is that if you look at it on a map, the top of that second climb isn't even barely the beginning of the big climb. So the last climb is, I think it was about 3.5 miles of just winding uphill, dirt, single track. And I had seen one of the race organizers on that trail, and he told me, I think you can still make it if you hustle. And I was like, well, I can't get pulled from this thing and not know that I did everything in my power in order to make it. Because if I even get there with a second to spare, I won't even check in, and I'll keep moving from 70 to 80 or 70, 81 or whatever it was. Anyway, 79. So that was the plan. So when he told me that, I didn't even look. Wasn't even wearing a watch at this point. I'm like, I just need to keep moving forward. I need to not get frustrated. But when he told me, hey, I think you can still make it, I took the next like 2 miles and I ran as hard as I absolutely could. I figured out if I pointed my toes out, my chafing wouldn't really rub that much, and all my stress fractures were on the inside of my feet. So if I was like walking on the outside of my feet, I could like had a little while until that whole muscular system burned out. Because essentially my running stride was what was really screwed. My hip flexors, quads, everything at this point. But if I angled my toes out and I ran all stupid, I at least knew I could move a lot faster. So that's what I did. I angled my toes out and kind of wedged them on each side of the single track trail. And everything I had for 2 miles, I just was really putting in work, running as hard as I could. And I thought, okay, I had about a half hour left, and I'm like, okay, I'm about a mile from, I guess I didn't even have a half hour left at like 15 minutes. But I'm like a mile from the checkpoint, so I'm going to put out. And I see an old couple coming down on a hike, and I ask them, hey, how far am I from the mile 70 checkpoint? And they were like, oh, you're about 2 miles. And my heart just sank. I was like, man, I just put in all this work, and I'm not going to make it. But that's what I'm here for. But needless to say, my pace after that wasn't so hard. I mean, I was really burnt out at that point. And what I didn't realize is when they told me 2 miles, I actually had about 3.5 left. Hadn't moved nearly as long as we thought we had. And then the distances, you know, they say it's 100 miles. My GPS had me running 85 total. So I don't know what, you know, the deal is with distances. I know they're not all super exact. I'm sure mine gets screwed up from the ups and the downs and the canyons and everything. That's what my GPS had me going. But either way, like when you're climbing uphill and you've been running for 23 hours, I mean, all of the hills just seem absolutely awful. And the miles just seem very, very long. So, you know, for the next, like, I would say hour and a half, I just I moved when I could, and I had to stop a lot and just like catch my breath and like just collect myself and keep my thoughts together, because I like really was starting to get frustrated. My body was like falling apart, and mentally I felt like, no, I can keep moving. But I was just getting really frustrated that my body was like not moving as fast as I wanted it to. My hip flexors were burnt out. You know, my heart rate was like I said, my heart rate would be like 180, and I'd be moving barely faster than a walk. And I was getting really pissed about that. So anyway, we finally get up to the mile 70 checkpoint with my pacer, and I didn't make the time, so that was the cutoff for me, and I had to pretty much end my race there, which was disappointing. Obviously, I wasn't loving the idea of going into another night of running for the next 30 plus miles, but that's what I was there for. I was there to run 100, and I was there to test myself. And honestly, I don't fail at things very often. Just through sheer willpower or whatever you want to call it, I think I pretty much succeed when I want to do something. So this was a big, big humbling experience for me to just, kind of tell people, hey, I'm going to go run this 100. No, I don't need to train. I can do whatever I want. And I just, in my mind, I'm like, I'm mentally strong enough that I know nothing can stop me. And, this time I just came up short, which I was obviously really bummed about. One thing that I want to say is there were a lot of times where I wanted to quit very badly, and there's a Steve Prefontaine quote. It says, don't let fatigue turn you into a coward. And sometimes I would catch myself, like, I would say to myself, like, are you moving slow because you know that if you don't get pulled, or if you don't quit but you get pulled, that's not your fault. And if I ever caught myself even thinking that way, I would immediately just wipe my brow and go head first into the fight. And that's what I felt like you had to do. I was like, there's no way that I'm going to end this race not knowing that I put every single ounce of effort I had to it. And even when, the chances were pretty desolate of me passing, I still had to know that I put everything, toward making it that I possibly could. So that's about how the race went. I'm super bummed I didn't make the 100 miles. But at the same time, like I said, I don't fail things that often. I'm really excited to find a new one. I'm going to train for this one. I'd run a 50 miler in the past, and I knew that like mentally I'd gotten through that pretty easily, but I grossly underestimated the terrain, the technicality, all so technical that like it really beat your ankles and feet up. And then the all night running, like there was a lot of unknowns that I didn't know how to prepare, you know, other than like kind of reading blogs and listening to podcasts. There was a lot of unknowns for me going into it. So I am happy with how I did to a certain degree. I'm bummed I didn't finish it, but for someone that doesn't run and didn't train, it's given me something that I'm really looking forward to conquering next time. So that's about how my race went, and I think I've taken way too much time here, so we'll get back to the podcast, and can't wait to tell you guys about the next one that I finished.
Chip the whip. Bitch, I feel good.
Thanks for listening to LionHeart Radio. Don't forget to rate us and download our other episodes. For your supplement needs, go to louaviv.com, and for your sports therapy needs, visit movement-rx.com.
West nigga be the coldest. Cleveland is the city where it's hustle or you hopeless. In my closet like a stove, bitch. Only difference is you ain't gon' find this in no stove, bitch. I'm fresher than your whole clique.